The 11th of June marks the deadline for Parliament to pass the Electoral Amendment Bill. According to civil society organizations, Parliament has failed to meet the Constitutional Court's requirements and will likely miss this deadline. In June 2020, the Constitutional Court ruled the Electoral Act in its current form is unconstitutional as it precludes independent candidates from being elected to the National Assembly. Joining us to weigh in on this is Professor William Gumede, who is the Executive Chairperson of Democracy Works. Prof, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us. As I mentioned there in my intro, that deadline is fast approaching. What could be the implications of Parliament missing that deadline?
Good morning and good morning to the viewers. If Parliament misses the deadline, we may not have our elections. We may have to delay the 2024 national elections. Now, the problem really is it tells a lot about Parliament. That Parliament actually set, on the bill, and actually only at the very last minute began to tackle the bill and to make some recommendations. Really, so from an oversight point of view, this is a real big failure from Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem that much of the blame has been leveled on the Home Affairs Department for, as you've mentioned, only tabling the amendment bill January this year. But other quarters have also highlighted the fact that Parliament wouldn't be in favor of an amendment of the sort to the Electoral Act because it just doesn't work in their favor as multi-party constituents. And so perhaps just talk to us about, the reluctance to have an amendment bill of this nature be passed that could effectively change the way South Africans vote and the way the political landscape, at least of this country, operates.
Yes. I mean, currently the weakness really of our electoral system is that voters cannot directly at the provincial and national level elect for their candidates. So what we have, our system, you can only at the provincial and national level elect a party, and then the party decides who would be the candidate, and for example, a voter cannot decide who would be the president, but the party decides that. Now, really, that's a real weakness because, that is, it really undermines accountability because it just means also that a voter cannot recall a parliamentarian who, for example, falls asleep in Parliament all the time and never does anything. And that is why it is so important that we change rather amend the electoral system. Now, when the system was put together, in the early 90s, there was provision made that at some point it will change, and that Parliament can make the change. But so far, the governing ANC, and I must also say, the opposition parties initially had opposed or rather drag their feet and are very unenthusiastic about changing the system because for now, the system actually works or appears to work for the ANC and for many opposition parties, because what it does is that it just means that, party leaders elect their candidates and they can handpick their candidates. And if you are a critical candidate and you oppose your party leadership, they just kick you out, and they can do that. But if voters vote a candidate indirectly, the party leaders can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's disconcerting, though, Professor, because when we think about the lengthy process that allowed us to actually get to this position and to think that we might still end up with an outcome that does very little to change the Electoral Act in a way that can actually move and progress South Africa's electoral system, it's very worrisome. We have these activists and civil society groups head to the courts and bring attention to the fact that the Electoral Act in its current form is potentially unconstitutional. The Concourt was in agreement with that and deferred, as it should, to Parliament to make the necessary changes. But then to see Parliament defer its duties to the executive, and of course the executive appointing the advisory council, which came up with its own recommendations, which weren't even adhered to by Parliament at the end of it all. It's worrisome to think that we have all of these processes in place, and even then, even still, we're likely to end up with an outcome that doesn't in any way really speak to the kind of change that South African voters need. I mean, what do we do in a situation like this, when the systems in place don't seem to be aiding those who are looking for change?
Absolutely. I mean, we have to just think about, I mean, the reason why we're in a crisis as a country, the lack of service delivery, the rise in corruption, the failure of the state in many cases is unfortunately also to do with Parliament not playing its oversight and Parliament not holding government, public representatives and elected representatives accountable. But there is one fundamental problem that you point out. The fact that, Parliament actually gave the role to look at or to propose amendments to the Electoral Bill to the Home Affairs Department. Now, in our democracy, there are different, there are different arms of the democracy. One, we've got an executive, which is a cabinet, includes Home Affairs, Minister, and so on. And then, of course, Parliament, and then we have the judiciary. And each of these branches are supposed to hold each other accountable. Now, it should have been Parliament from day one. They should have actually, set up their own inquiry or commission to make proposals, not, kicking it for tuts for, Home Affairs to do it. So, that really is, again, where Parliament abdicate its oversight role. But there's also another element to it, is the ANC itself. So clearly, the ANC is a party, who's the governing party, also, is to blame, because the party has been dragging its feet on this, because the party's not very leaders are not very enthusiastic about making the system more accountable. Because if the system is more accountable, it just means that many leaders, ANC leaders, will be elected or they will be recalled by the populace, not by the party recalling them, but ordinary member citizens or voters can then recall them. So I think that is. Parliament really just abdicates its duty in this case. And I have to tell you, I mean, how this, changing the electoral system is absolutely important for South Africans if we want to improve the quality of democracy, if we want to bring in accountability. We really have to give ordinary voters a say in who they elect. And we must also allow independent candidates that who are not part of a political party to be able to stand for elections. It's an absolutely important. I mean, just like one of the disadvantages of the system currently now. For example, many ANC voters voted for the ANC when Jacob Zuma was the president of the ANC. So, but they had no power to have Jacob Zuma removed, or they didn't select Jacob Zuma, but they selected the ANC as a party, because as a voter you cannot select an individual at a provincial and national level, and you must just accept whoever the party proposed will be your candidate.
Mm. Something that you mentioned at the start of our conversation, Prof, was the fact that, any further delays with regards to this amendment could potentially impact the 2024 general elections. We saw something similar happening last year ahead of the 2021 local government elections. In that case, the Constitutional Court, of course, dismissed the application to have those elections postponed. I'd imagine that we'd probably make a similar ruling with regards to the general elections, given the fact that the IEC is supposed to be given enough time to adequately conduct free and fair elections. But what we're seeing, are our elections under some sort of siege or under some sort of risk or threat? Because we're seeing this happening again and again, where we're having the Independent Electoral Commission having to, request for time to properly conduct free and fair elections, calling to question the credibility of those elections.
Yes, the fact that Parliament is not playing its role. Clearly, what Parliament has now done is really put pressure on the elections itself, on having the elections on time, and not only having it on time, but even when proposals are made, the Independent Electoral Commission needs sufficient time, as you say, to bring about the changes. So if Parliament, kick the can, as it has been doing now, it doesn't give the Electoral Commission, the time to put in the systems, to put the systems in place. And we've already seen, last year at the local government elections, there were some niggly things, there were some issues, because, again, a lot of political parties waited until the end and to register and all sorts of things, putting a lot of pressure on the Commission itself. So really, what Parliament, the delay by Parliament, and really it's not even a delay, there's a deliberate delay, it seems, or incompetence from a Parliament point of view, is really undermining the quality of our democracy. It is also undermining the right of ordinary citizens to have an election on time, but a quality elections. It undermines the ISC also, doesn't give the ISC enough time, and it really just undermine the quality of our voting experience, which is such an important experience. It's certainly the most important experience of any voter in a democracy.